Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Infinity Workforce Solutions Fast Forward webinar series. Appreciate y'all taking some of your time to join us this afternoon. We have a really good program set up for today. It's a very, very important topic, especially in this trucking industry, and that's about truck parking. So our topic today is truck parking, driver safety, load safety, and efficiency. So it's a very timely subject. I think over the years, it's been one of the top industry issues and certainly probably number one for most truck drivers out there. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. You all are muted out there, so we can't hear you. So if you have a question or a comment, you can type into the chat box that's there. There's also a Q&A box that you can put your questions in. And what we're going to try to do is take those questions toward the end of the webinar so we can let our guests present their information. So why don't y'all just jump in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're from, what company you work for. And while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce a couple other folks here. I'll also want to introduce Mark Ray. Most of you that have been on our webinars before probably know Mark. He's a regular host on the program. Mark's an industry executive veteran in this business, about 35 plus years. So Mark, what do you think about today's topic?
Oh, truck parking, in my opinion, maybe the most studied with the least actionable solutions of any issue that I can think of. We got a great speaker today, Scott Grenerth. It impacts all facets of our industry, and again, it's been studied and studied. Anybody that has been around says, yeah, we got a problem, but what are we going to do about it? And the other thing I would mention, Steve, is this is an excellent opportunity for some customized content that you can develop for your staff for trip planning specific to truck parking, which is a huge issue. So Scott's going to give us a lot of input. He's passionate about this. He's emotionally attached to providing a solution for our industry. So I'm really looking forward to today's workshop.
I certainly am too, and I think most of our guests are. So let me move on and introduce our guest. Our subject matter expert today is Scott Grenerth. Scott has over 1 million miles of safe driving as a company driver and owner-operator of his own equipment. So he's walked the walk. He's lived the life. So he understands it as well as anybody. You know, throughout Scott's career, he's been an advocate for truckers at the state and federal level. He served on the entry-level driver training advisory committee to create the first ever federal CDL standards and has testified before Congress regarding regulatory matters. Scott's involvement with the truck parking issue has included hosting a national coalition on truck parking regional meeting and serving as a champion for the state, regional, and local government coordination group for that coalition. Scott works for Truck Specialized Parking Services, where he works with the public and private sector to provide truck parking solutions. So I want all of you to welcome Scott Grenerth. Welcome, Scott.
All right. Thank you there, Steve. Absolutely. And thank you, Mark, for that comment about being personally involved in it. You nailed it very well there. Absolutely. So yeah, we do. We just about me ultra briefly is as Steve said there, we help drivers find parking and we help to create new parking capacity. That's the bottom line of it there, what we're doing. And next slide, Steve. Then again, about me, indeed, I've been there and done a lot with dry vans, very highly specialized flatbed hauling, and hauling a covered wagon, flatbed with a covered wagon on it behind there. And a couple years ago, helped out some friends who just needed some help with the farming near where I live, and I figured it out, about 250,000 pounds of grain over that harvest season. So done quite a few things out there. Next. And so today, what I want to hit on are these key points here. Looking at an ultra quick overview, not because you all need to be told that there's a problem with truck parking. I just want to help you just get a little better idea where I come from with it very briefly. Looking at the impacts, how widespread they are and where that comes in. Also, because of some of those meetings that Steve mentioned in the intro there, being involved with things, I've got a real good pulse on what's going on out there. I'd like you to know what that is, that's been done, is ongoing, some future thoughts, and definitely hitting on how can we be part of the solution. I hope that's a big part of your thoughts and comments at the end. If you all thinking, what can we do there, both as sending drivers out there as carriers and as saying, hey, is there a way we can actually be involved in the truck parking solution? So next. So part of that ultra quick intro here, and hit it one more time there, Steve. Then there we go, and one more. I forget this is the one where that is and one more. Sorry about that. I forgot this slide. It pops up with 4 different things there. Obviously, you all know it, taking time. Oh, can you go back, Steve? I'm sorry. Yeah, we're at the 4. Yeah, there we go. We got it. How long it takes to park is a key thing. The studies out there have been done show it takes a lot of time. And with ELDs being involved as they are these days and for a while now, we know that along with the hours of service to really take it full circle is the problem there. I'll never forget when I was hauling one of the last just general freight loads I hauled a few years ago, just helping out a local carrier part-time, that I got back to the terminal with 30 seconds on my ELD. So I'll never forget that, 30 seconds. So anyhow, now, and we all know, well, there, plenty of good officers out there that would never write someone up for going over by a few seconds. You all also know there's that other one over there that would. So we know it's an issue, it's a crunch. And at the bottom left there with the exclamation point is a key point. When we look at where the solutions come from, keep in mind, on average, it's about 10% of all truck parking inventory in the average state is actually provided by the state, by the public government entity there. That means the whole entire remainder is private sector. So when you think about where the solutions come from, clearly private sector has got to be involved, but there's nothing stopping the states from doing things too. Next. So when we look at how that all fits in here, this huge, huge stress out there is that first item. Massive, massive stress for drivers. And I know for you all too at the carrier level, because the implications affect everybody. That if there's ever a domino effect, boy, shippers and receivers, they're the ones that push that first domino and get it going. Because as long as they're controlling the time, when you as a responsible trucker are out there, start off saying, I got plan A, I got plan B, I got plan C. I've got good friends out there to this day who still, are still driving, and they start their day out with plan A, B, and C, and D. But as it says there, you could end up using the whole darn alphabet when you're sitting there for 4 hours waiting to get loaded and unloaded. And now, when you thought you had a good plan and a backup plan, now it's much later in the day and you're in an area you don't know as well. So that's a huge problem. I will never forget the infamous words from a very nice person who I met personally, really like her personally, but former FMCSA director Ann Farrow. When at the hours of service hearing, she said, truckers just need to plan better. And that is stuck in my craw for the rest of my life, because you try and plan, but still, we obviously can't throw that out the window. You still do need to plan clearly.
Got to
And then
expect
again,
the unexpected, don't you?
yes, exactly. And traffic that's nothing compared to the shippers and receivers. So more about that a little bit later as we wrap things up. So, and then the no crystal ball on the dashboard of the truck. My International 9200i that I bought, I promise you there was no crystal ball on that dashboard. In your load planning rooms there, your dispatchers, all those folks, they don't have one either. So that all makes it difficult. Next. So when we look at how that domino effect adds up, it adds up in a lot of ways, but one of those for sure that impacts clearly is right here. ATRI, the American Transportation Research Institute, they had truckers keep a diary of their truck parking experiences and looking at figuring out what's the lost time here, where are we losing in revenue, how much stress are we causing a driver. Again, figure out this is there's monetary and that you can clearly see, and there's a stress that's invisible until you start losing drivers at least. Where the figure came out here is an average of 56 minutes of revenue time, and again, or stress time, however you want to look at that, sacrificed by drivers daily. And that comes into a total of about 9,300 revenue earning miles per year. So whether that driver is getting paid by the out mile, a percentage of the load, however you're doing it, that still equates to lost wages and again, a tremendous amount of stress out there. And I know drivers who have absolutely left the industry. Good people. They had all the skills. They just could not handle this, could not handle telling their loved one. And I've been there. I missed my wife's surprise birthday party that I planned for her several years ago because of this situation, getting caught up in the day of loads not being, in that case, it was getting loaded anywhere near on time. And I left that carrier, said bye-bye. And boy, am I glad I ever did. And again, that comes from the ATRI's study there. Next. So looking at this, there's a couple things in here, but I want to focus on one thing at the moment. And that's the personal side of this. And I hope you all are familiar with and keeping in touch with what's going on out there and have heard of Jason's Law. But just as a quick reminder and to introduce you to another person who's more personal to me, Jason Rivenberg was murdered in 2009 when he arrived early for an appointment with a load of milk in South Carolina, right in the corridor that I used to drive through all the time. And they turned him away and said, nope, you're not allowed on the property in here. You can't park here and take a nap while you're waiting for the next person to get ahead of you. You got to go somewhere else. Well, that area does not have a lot of truck parking nearby. And he would have had to have gone quite a ways further away to get to a proper legal parking spot. So he parked at a spot where many people had parked before him. And while he was sitting there sleeping, he was murdered for a handful of money that he had in his pocket. And that left his spouse, Hope Rivenberg, as a widow, pregnant with 2 children. So, and thankfully, Hope advocated for truck parking wonderfully, worked with some other people, Desiree Woods, some other people, Real Women in Trucking group, to get information gathered. Representative Paul Tonko got the Jason's Law passed through Congress, but all Jason's Law specifically laid out is that for the first time ever, and I don't want to dissuade, what this is, or diminish it, but for the first time ever, they would study truck parking at the federal level. So the Federal Highway Administration took that over. As Steve mentioned in my bio intro there, I was involved right from that point many times going forward. Arkansas, interestingly enough, was the one and only state that was doing a regular inventory of their truck parking, the only state that did that. And I know one of the guys from RDOT who used to do that all the time. He now works for TRB. So let's fast forward real quickly. Michael Boglin in 2014, he picked up a load in Kentucky, heading up to Detroit, Michigan, and got up there early for his delivery and went to get on site, and they would not let him on there. So he parked just right around the corner. I mean, literally a stone's throw from the guard shack. There's actually a pretty good amount of light coming from that the facility there from ThyssenKrupp Connect Metals. Next slide. Oh, sorry, it's another one. Go ahead, next slide again. And next. There we go. So Michael, unfortunately, you can see the result of what happened with his truck there in the bottom right. He was shot, and then his truck burned down with him inside. And on June 27th. And this was right after I started working at OIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. And so I was flying back to Ohio via the Detroit airport. Next slide. And just a few days later, you can see in the bottom, July 3rd is the date I took these pictures. I went to that site because it meant a lot to me because I personally delivered the exact same load, probably 70 times, I'm going to guess. Next slide. And that load you can see right here on the bill of lading, ThyssenKrupp Connect Metals, and going from Lewisport, Kentucky to Detroit, Michigan. So when I say that there's a problem here, again, we've got multiple layers to it. Drivers know about this. They understand what the risk is. Again, that's why you get people leaving the industry who've got all the skills, but they're just saying, hey, I cannot handle being in this kind of situation. So next. So when we look at the threat to the driver and lives, another huge part of this where you can put a very clear dollar amount on it again is cargo theft. This was just going into Labor Day weekend, of course. We all know I hope you do. If you're if you're going to be a successful business, you understand at least every holiday, of course, is a key prime time for theft because the thieves know what's going on. They know there's going to be people who are going to leave a trailer unattended somewhere or tractor trailer unattended. Doesn't even occur then, though. I had a good friend who lived in the Houston, Texas area who parked a beautiful truck. It was a tribute to veterans with on his flatbed, he had a load of roofing shingles. And he left it there at a spot he'd been parking for years, came back, and the whole thing was gone, the whole tractor and trailer. So again, it can happen anytime, not just over a holiday weekend. Thankfully, Steve got back his beautiful truck and the load. They had just gone like a couple exits down and ditched it off in a spot. I shouldn't say ditched it, leaving it sitting upright, not in a ditch. So, and he was able to just drive the truck back, and it wasn't a minor thing. But again, you know that the load is sitting there just as a target. And so if you get a driver who gets in a bad spot, gets in a pinch, and says, hey, you know what? I don't have anywhere to park but this dark alley right here. It might not take more than 15 minutes for them to walk, even 15 minutes, 5 minutes to walk away from that truck, and that truck can be disappearing. Or again, worse, for the drivers inside there, and they really want the freight that badly. So those numbers add up. I talked with one of the people from the National Retail Federation several years ago. So when you think about this adjust for inflation, as $1 billion plus problem every year, when you add up throughout the whole year, how much freight goes missing on trucks out there. And we know there's a wide variety of reasons. Part of it, though, is definitely this right here. So next. So let's take a look at, we know these problems are out there. We're not alone in knowing these problems are out there. Everybody up to Secretary Buttigieg clearly gets it in the current administration, and I think to be credit, it's been on the radar screen for a while now at a pretty good level. And I just can say I personally heard him talk about it. And the staff underneath the whole US DOT clearly gets it. State DOTs get it. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of variance there. But so what's been done and what is underway? So next. One thing I just don't want to ever glance over, because we need to remember this and keep this in mind, especially as you can be advocates out there for things happening. If you remember during the throes of COVID happening, when everything was going into lockdown and we had restaurants closed down, that many truck stops out there closed down all their food operations. We weren't sure yet how this thing was spreading, so they didn't want people touching stuff. So it was literally even hard for my friends out there, literally, to get a cup of coffee. I'm sure you all heard stories about this too from your drivers. So just don't miss the fact that the Federal Highway Administration took a really politically volatile step and said, hey, we're going to allow food trucks in rest areas, because there is a prohibition on commercial activity within the main line of the interstate highway. In other words, rest areas. Once you get off, you can do whatever you want. But if you're within the right of way of an interstate, no commercial activity. And just to put it bluntly, is NATSO, the National Association of Truck Stop Operators, hugely opposed that because they see it as a threat to people not wanting to go off the highway and spend money at a private enterprise, at a Love's, TA, Petro, mom and pop place, wherever you may be. So FHWA did a great job by helping out in that regard there. And just something to keep in mind as we look at what could be potential solutions. Could there be public-private partnerships that can be one way of the many ways of attacking the truck parking issue? So next. So when it comes to finding availability and avoiding places where there's no capacity, and those are both equally important. And I want to stress that because I've heard some drivers who, bless their hearts, might be a little bit into the complaining mode and find complaining real easy to say, yeah, that sign says there's no truck parking there. That doesn't help me one bit. And I know that's an easy thing to say, but with one more second of thought, you go, wait a minute. If I don't waste my time and get into the liability risk that is a rest area or especially a truck stop, for no good reason, if I avoid going in there because I know there's nothing available, that's not your ideal outcome, but it's way better than going in there, wasting your time, or risking having some not very well trained driver backing up into your truck as you're trying to get through. So I want to point that out very clearly, that when we talk about looking for available parking spaces, seeing a zero on a sign is never the ideal, but it also helps you avoid potential risks with no chance of reward. So, but let's get back to this here. So the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which is the 17 states that, as you can tell, mainly the Eastern U.S. there, they asked drivers, hey, would you take advantage of the opportunity to know if there was real-time info? Yes, absolutely. They want to know that. California commissioned a study a while back asking drivers directly if they went out to the truck stops and shippers and receivers and asked them, if you have up to the minute information about parking areas, would you use it? And heck yes is the answer. And actually, this study went back several years. So the availability of multiple ways of getting information in the cab, when the truck's parked, being able to pull out your phone, a tablet, an ELD device, whatever could transmit that during safe conditions to read it, or of course roadside signage, wasn't quite as developed as it is now. So I'm sure the answer would be even higher, plus the fact that drivers are of a generation every day that it's younger. Next. So when we look at these systems that are out there, which is TPIM stands for Truck Parking Information Management System. So that means real-time data being fed from some kind of a sensor to signs, websites, all of the above. I don't know if any of you out there do this, but there are a few carriers that even get this information direct to them, so they can share it with their drivers. And I know that because our company is personally involved with doing that. This is one of the things we do is we create these truck parking information management systems. But as you can see, this is every one of those dots is where there's a current system here throughout the U.S., with the exception of Florida. Just that I left Florida off because they're by themselves, and unfortunately, they don't share the information freely. By that, I mean outside the state lines freely. But all these others, you can get it, the feed of information from each state individually, which that's another slide to come. But again, clearly there are gaps. So as we look at these truck parking information systems, I want to give you a real quick what they do, how they work, just so you're aware. And again, you can be advocates when it comes to state DOTs for solutions. So next. So on the right is an image of one of our sites in Iowa, where we have multiple sites instrumented there, and rest areas, way stations, and multiple private truck stops, even a casino. And this is a system that we installed for Iowa, what they wanted. And they wanted to use pucks, which I'll show you in a second what they actually look like. But these are sensors that go in the ground. And I'm sure you all are putting this two together going, wait a minute, this thing is in the ground and our 80,000-pound trucks are driving over these things in the ground? Yeah, you could see from Florida DOT that used pucks as well. In 30 days, 10% of them had failed. Go another 30 days, another 10% failed. So all these spots are basically not working. You can see at the bottom in the key there, it says the orange ones are the ones that are not responding. So it's not the greatest way of doing it. It was simply the first way of doing it early on. Next slide. Oh, in Iowa, as you can see, you don't need to go back, but you could see in there also a note, Iowa DOT, I'm glad to say, is going to go with a modern sensor that's coming up in a few seconds. So there is an image of one of those pucks or magnetometers. They're called pucks because it does look like a hockey puck. Just you drill a hole in the ground, drop it in just at the right height, which is another trick to it, and then put the epoxy over it and hope it'll last. So, but again, they're not the best, and all they can tell you is there's a hunk of metal above. But that's, again, very inexpensive upfront. A lot of states do that. Next. And then we go video analytics. So now, hey, we're not driving over the thing with a semi. That's an advancement. That's good. And video analytics, as I'm sure you're aware, just broadly, that technology it can be very good. The main thing, and it can give you a little bit more information about the vehicle coming through, like the size and shape of it, things like that. But the weather is not always good. And when you have things falling in front of a video camera, that tends to mess things up, unless you get an even more and more and more expensive camera. And by at some point, you're like, you know what, maybe there's a better answer. So we'll go to the next one and quickly wrap this up with, and again, to just be clear for you, this is the company I work for, Truck Specialized Information Services, a product that we have. So on the right-hand side there, that is a thing that's really not much bigger than this smartphone I'm holding up. It's just a little bit thicker and slightly larger in the dimensions. And obviously, again, you're not driving over it. And because it's radar based, it works in all weather. And it also can give you information on the size and speed of objects very clearly. And it's something, just again, to give you an idea of it, we are getting it installed in Iowa, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Kansas Turnpike, and the Denver International Airport. And those are all within like the last 2 to 3 months, that things that we've wanted to get it installed there. So I'm just simply saying, make sure state DOTs know there are options available out there. You know, there may be somebody else who comes up with something even better tomorrow, and that's fine. But you know, at least let them know there's things out there that they should be looking into when it comes to these systems to make sure they really work and that they give good, accurate data. Because at the Denver airport, when we installed our sensors there, they told us, I'm sorry, they're not working. I'm really sorry, but the numbers aren't agreeing with our old system. Turned out their old system was the one that was broke. They did not know it until they had sensors that really worked.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, we definitely want to buy your sensors now. Or we've got like 20 something sensors set up to monitor their traffic there, because it doesn't, you can, it's useful for more than just truck parking. So next slide. So why are we doing this? Why are we spending this money? That was my fuel tax dollars at work to put in the very first system in the country, because that very first system, which by the way, we installed that in Michigan, went live in 2014. And I was paying fuel taxes galore to Michigan because I was up there all the time, my IFTA miles. And so my money went to that system. I want to make sure it works, but it's still a lot of money. You want to make sure it's spent well. Well, the reason we're doing this, obviously, is because you all, I'm sure, are well aware of what happened in Illinois on I-70. I actually drove through there the day after this happened. I had been over in St. Louis visiting a friend and went right back by there the next day. And the tragedy of the Greyhound bus hitting, we all know this has happened way too many times, hitting the back of a Fiat truck parked on the shoulder, because you all know it. And I'm glad to say, by the way, I mean, you never want this to happen, but as far as what happens afterward, one positive I've seen, there have been a lot of media accounts that I've come across that accurately reported what happened and put it in the proper context of saying, yeah, these drivers didn't have a choice. You know, they're stuck in a spot. Oh, right, sure, they could just kind of gone into St. Louis and have found parking, right? Sure,
Yeah.
not going to happen. No way. East St. Louis, that whole area, it just gets clogged like nothing. I hauled a lot of steel, a lot of aluminum into St. Louis and steel out of St. Louis in a day, and still go back to visit friends there. But anyhow, good media accounts, good reporting about it from local media outlets, including talking to Representative Boost, who sponsored the bill to create new truck parking capacity, because that is actually, I think it's just a hair outside of his district. It's right next door to it. So I think that helped in this regard, again, to turn a horrible situation into something better. So obviously, parking on the side of the road on the shoulder is something that is, to put it mildly, is the wording I chose, a dangerous scenario. Gosh, over my career, I'm not kidding, I could probably count on 2 hands the number of times I did that. And one of them was, the first one was when I was in Fort Wayne, Indiana. My situation was the roads were getting flooded. There was literally like nowhere to go. It was torrential rain, and everything on the CD was, yeah, US 33 is shut down 20 miles down, US 224 shut down that way, on and on. So I had to park on the shoulder. And that's one of the very few times I ever did it, because it is tremendously risky, and then liability comes into play.
Yeah.
And the one thing that's going to be interesting with this is, and TSB is investigating as they should. You may remember, if you've been in the industry for a while, there used to be a whole lot more truck parking on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. But NTSB had a situation just like this where a bus smashed in the back of trucks, and they said, now you need to be X number of feet, which I don't know what the number is exactly, but I want to say it's probably almost 50 feet off on those pull-off areas behind the yellow line they painted in order to legally park on the Pennsylvania Turnpike. So they lost hundreds of truck parking spaces along there because of that. It's kind of a thing for me to think. I don't know, getting people arrested versus the potential for a catastrophic accident. I'll admit, I'm glad I didn't have to make that call. So, okay, next slide. So as we look at doing this, I mentioned earlier, the incomplete network. This gives you a little bit better visualization. Interstate 10 corridor from Texas to California. They went together with a pooled fund, got funding to put in a truck parking information system. Again, I'm glad it could move a little faster in Texas. I'll leave it at that. We're eager to get it put in. We just need things to happen on the TxDOT side. New Mexico, Arizona, California, again. There are other corridors that are looking at doing that too. And then you can see in the light blue are the corridors that are existing today. And we are looking at saying, hey, where else can this be done? Port crossings, other things like that too. And so in a keynote on the right-hand side, under complete the network, successfully implement private truck stops as part of the network. So the states that have done the truck parking systems with real-time info overwhelmingly have not included private truck stops. Michigan, where we got the contract and delivered it, and Iowa, where we got the contract and delivered it, do have an abundance of private truck stops as part of it. My home state of Ohio, nope. The state I'm sitting in right now, Kentucky, nope, there's one actually. I'll give them credit, they got one, but it's only one. And as you all know, talking to your drivers, don't want them coming into the office kind of reeking. they would rather have a shower when they show up. They want to get them showered and nice at the customers. So including private truck stops as part of the network is important. And at the very bottom, on the left and the right, you'll see it says, not enough inventory and not enough information. Definitely, we've got to attack this from both sides. Truckers need to know what's available out there, and there needs to be more capacity available. Next. So I kind of hit all these things here already, so I'll just skip this in a second. This is things that we've learned from our interaction, including private truck stops, having the states talk with each other, but then they need to act, pursue all the funding options, more of that in a bit. So yeah, next slide. And when I talk about funding, I'm glad to tell you there's funding. This is a memorandum from the US DOT jointly issued by the Federal Highway Administration and, some of you may be surprised, FMCSA, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So FHWA, I go with my little bullet point on the left there in that box. FHWA has 14 silos of money, different areas of funding that are eligible to be used for truck parking projects to create capacity out there, any effort you could go at it with, basically, or real-time truck parking information systems, or a combination of the two. And then one of these silos here is FMCSA. They have a funding program that is only eligible to be spent on the technology. So the nice thing is, you could say, hey, you know what? We want to get that funding from FMCSA and not take away money from the roads and bridges funding. So again, bottom line, there's a lot of options for states to spend money. Next slide. So, and I'm all about action. So my home state of Ohio, I'm glad to tell you, they are going after this. And I forget the statuses, I need to check on it, but this $2.5 million in raised grant funding to conduct a truck parking study. Well, okay, you tell me a truck parking study? Yeah, my eyeballs are back there in my head, rolling way back, yes, because we've all heard about it, as Mark mentioned, way too many times. But the good thing is, you see underlined in there, it'll lead to the development of 10 parking sites, and they're specifically looking at the proverbial low-hanging fruit, property they already own, abandoned rest areas, way stations, excess land parcels, and adjacent to private truck stops. So, and I'll toot the horn in Ohio here for this one thing. They have successfully done this several times already. Okay, eyeballs in the back of the head again. Some little old truck, okay, I'm not little, I'm 6 feet 9 inches tall. Some really tall trucker told them, oh, way over a decade ago. I got to think about what year it was at some point. It might have been even 13 years ago, that they should take that old way station on Interstate 77 and convert it to truck parking. This last year, they finally did it, but I'm glad they did it. And they did it on Interstate 76 as well, and on 71 as well. And they're doing it right by my house, actually, just between Toledo and where I live on I-75. They knocked down the old way station. It's going to become truck parking. So there are places out there. So you who live out there in any of the other states, not Ohio, tell them, go look at what Ohio's done as an example, or Missouri, where they've converted areas into truck parking. Very low cost, simple. They're not building, to use my former boss at OIDA, his words, truckers don't need the Taj Mahal. A restroom, trash can, lighting, and we're doing real well. Absolutely. So that's what they've done in Ohio, restroom, trash can, lighting. Missouri, restroom, trash can, lighting. So that's it. Next slide. So let's look at some solutions for capacity expansion. So I mentioned in Ohio, this is what they're already looking at here. Former way stations, former rest areas, converting into truck parking only, because cars don't need it nearly as badly. I mean, it really, definitely not. And former construction sites, P3 opportunities. Our company's got money. We can come in, be a partner on these. We're working with the state of Utah on that right now. So excess capacity. And then the other thing is, this can involve you turning excess capacity you may have into additional revenue. So we'll get that in a bit. Next slide. So let's look at real world examples super quickly. Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, my hat is off to them, and the consultant they hired to do the actual work here for them. They're looking at, we've already got these spots. What can we do to add more? So there, as you can see right there, they're looking at the overlay is the proposal. How many more spots can we add? And the answer is a lot. Next one. Same thing there, and I'll take a sip while you all look. The next one. Which, by the way, I know some people say, oh, I don't like left-hand exit and entry. I grew up in Florida. Every single rest area or travel plaza along the Florida Turnpike is, bingo, left-hand exit and entry. They have long exit and long entry ramps. I'm not aware of ever seeing an accident there, or know anybody who ever has. In North Carolina on I-77 near Statesville, North Carolina, how many years ago is that now? Maybe 7 now, I want to say. They did a beautiful rest area in the middle there. And again, everybody I've asked, any ever seen an accident, ever heard of an accident there? No. I think when done well, they do just fine. So, okay, next one. So, so states are looking at alternatives, and there's an examples. That's the key part there for those 3 slides. So one other concept that's been talked about, the truck parking coalition meetings with FHWA, and I brought this up with private industry, and I'm gonna work at it till it happens. And I think we might have the partner to be able to do this, but it's kind of plodding along, unfortunately, is saying, hey, let's get private sector side of this now. It could be public, it certainly could be, but it's most likely public-private partnership to say, when we're developing the 50 gazillionth Amazon warehouse, or the 50 gazillionth in one, because they're probably already at 50 gazillion, create a truck parking hub within this area. That way people whoever's coming to the warehouse, whoever's coming to that factory, who's ever coming to that trailer storage yard there, wherever they may need to pick up and deliver at, some seasonal produce business, somebody who just moved in, last mile, whatever is in this industrial warehouse area, that this is a shared parking area. And it's a thing that would succeed brilliantly because you can get a company like ours to run this. We do truck parking. Our founder of our company has run a facility up in Detroit, Michigan for many years, perfectly, wonderfully well. So that is my dream idea. And it's been done in Canada with the Canadian Railroad up there, actually, where they did this for a few different sites, and it works beautifully. So I don't know why it doesn't take off, but that's out there. Next. So I want to introduce you to a thought here. I call it the truck parking tax. So this is the way again, when I talked earlier about how I see things. When I had my own truck and trailer and I could 100%, I was leased to a carrier, but 100% accept to reject a load anytime. They really meant it. They didn't lie. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. So when they said, Scott, we got a load going to insert whatever city, state, I would go, okay, all right. I know my brain's telling me what it's like going there. All right, what else have you got? Okay, I got this load going over that way. All right, let's use this example. If it was Atlanta and I said, okay, when is it going to have to deliver? And they said, like 9 o'clock in the morning on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You get what I'm getting at? Google, when I took this screenshot, pardon me if I laugh really loudly here, sure, an hour and 40 minutes. You know darn well. I mean, even if you live, and I saw a few of you logging in from Kansas, whatever, you all know it's going to be up to Marietta, solid red in the morning. Google was really optimistic on this. So that's why I say 55 miles is the length, but it's untold amount of traffic delays. And why am I parking up there in a TA in Cartersville? It's the last spot. There's a TA and there's, I think, a Love's near there and a Pilot as well and a rest area, but they're all way up there. And if you're delivering to the Fulton Industrial Corridor, which is the destination I'm putting down there, that you don't want to be 55 miles away. So why call us a truck parking tax? Let's go back to that scenario. They said, Scott, we got this load or that load. If this load was going to Atlanta and had to deliver at 9, 10 o'clock in the morning on a weekday, and this load was going to some spot that I had no problem finding a place to park at and not deal with congestion, I'd say, okay, what are these loads paying? And if they paid the same and everything else being equal, mileage, weight, all that other good stuff, be like, sure, I'm not going to touch that one. I'm taking that one, including getting the next load out, of course.
Yeah.
That load over there, but you're like, but Scott, we really need it covered. How badly do you need it covered? Because you're going to have to pay me $200 more than what the load pays now to let me get it. I hauled those loads for 200, even $250 more, multiple times down to places I hated going because I wasn't going to touch it without that. And so I want you to think about in terms of that CO2 emissions, anger, frustration, the lost productivity, just when you're sending people places and people are saying, hey, give us flexibility on when we're going to deliver if we're going to that spot. So we can get in there late at night or in the morning, or just simply say, no, it's you all are creating a bad thing for us here. So next. And then along these same lines of thinking about how much is it going to cost me to do these things, truck parking, reserve truck parking through the major chains is, I can honest to goodness say it's because of me. When I was still an active driver, I got the chance to meet, you could probably tell already about me, I'm not going to pass up chances to do things because I want to do things. I got the chance to meet the whole leadership of TA Petro. And they had an open house event, said, we want to hear truckers' thoughts. And I went in and they really meant it. They really did, back when Tom O'Brien was leadership. And Ara Bagdasarian was like his second, third down. And I sat next to him and we hit it off wonderfully. And I told him, the spot here in this picture, that's Florence, Kentucky, the TA, said, man, if you all would have it so when I got there, I knew I had a place, I'd be even more your regular customer than I already am because they were my favorite truck stop chain, TA Petro. And so keep it that short. Months later, Ara calls me on the phone. Hey, Scott, we did it. I'm like, you did what? And we did it at the spot you asked. I'm like, you did what? And then he finally tells me, that's 2012. I was one of their first customers that very first week at the very first location they ever had. And the reason I went there is because of what it says at the top. I knew if I got parked there, I was in the right spot going southbound the next morning on the other side of the Cincinnati traffic. I did not want to start my day out in absolute gridlock and frustration. I'd much rather spend a few bucks, know I'm at a good, safe facility, and get headed out in the morning with nothing ahead of me but open road. I made more money because of that. So just think about that. And I encourage you to think about it because more and more carriers, I just literally this week, Had another good friend of mine who drives for a carrier say, yeah, my carrier now pays for truck parking, no problem. I need to just make, not as long as we don't do it every single day. So keep that in mind. Okay, next, as we're getting toward the end here. So looking at multiple strategies that can be done. So can you work out as a carrier an agreement to say, hey, can we park at a customer? And my two examples there, Lowe's, when they, pardon me for saying new hours of service, I should have said new version, whatever ago. When the new hours of service came out, implementing the 14-hour clock, there you go. That's the way of putting it. The carrier I was with at the time worked out an agreement with Lowe's and said, hey, we're moving to 100% drop and hook. It ended up there were 2 stores we had to still do live unload, but that was 2 out of the many of them. And they did a good job too. And we were allowed to park at the customer. So we could go in there, drop and hook a trailer and go to sleep at the dock, no problem, or wherever, off out of the way. And because we were out of anybody else's way at the dock because the trailer stayed. Kriska, the Canadian carrier, they worked out a deal with Unilever because Unilever kept was asked them, why don't you want to haul our loads? We're offering you money. And they said, it's because nobody wants to go to your horrible place there, horrible location, I should say, near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They ended up offering a way for them to allow drivers to park at the facility. Talk to your customers is what I'm saying. See what you can arrange with them to be able to park there. They will understand in some cases. Yep, I know there are some that won't. I don't doubt it. Regarding the real-time truck parking information systems, make sure your drivers and your support staff are aware of those. Yep, it's really frustrating that every state is on a separate system, their 511 website, app, whatever. When we come out with our website with truck parking, we're partnering with someone to have thousands of spaces across the country with secure parking. It's going to include all of the TPIM systems as well on our app. So there will be one spot where you can see them all together. So I'm really looking forward to that. So next, but meanwhile, still utilize what you got out there. Find reservable parking solutions. I'm kind of working this way from free down to what might cost me something, but it still has a return. So at a reservable spot though, I encourage you, there have been a lot of places popping up lately that are like the Airbnb of truck parking. And hey, anything's better than nothing. I welcome it. But just keep in mind, if it's not a secure location, what we looked at the very beginning, what can happen to your driver, what can happen to your load, those kind of things. So there is value in a secure spot for sure. And I just pointed out it's an open spot is our site we've got. It'll be coming down the road at some point here. So when you can, this goes back to Ann Farrow, and again, just her just saying, well, just plan better. It was a really bad comment. Boy, was it one of the worst in trucking history. But when you can, plan ahead and have that flexibility. And keep in mind that if you reserve a spot that can maximize what you do that day, what your driver is able to do, utilize those 11, 14 hours as much as you can, or maximize the next day by having you in the best possible spot to begin that next day. Like I used in my example of coming south through Cincinnati and going, I'm not going to have to deal with that in the morning, or south and getting into downtown Nashville at the TA right there. I park there all the time because in the morning you wake up, everybody's coming into Nashville and you're the one leaving. And I want to, again, reiterate, when you hear all the time about a driver shortage, it's people leaving the end. There's plenty of people with CDLs out there. The facts bear that out to the ends of the earth from FMCSA statistics. But are there drivers that want to do the job given everything? And you can't fix everything. Trucking is going to be stressful no matter what. But just say, what can we do? And what should we include as cost of doing business to get to a carrier? Like I gave that example earlier. That one over there that's going to that spot that I know is going to suck my time out of my availability, get me tied up in things, versus that. You want me to do that? Okay, here's what it's going to cost. So next. And that goes right along with this. Hauling for customers that value the trucker's time. I did not go to places that wasted my time unless they paid a lot more. Absolutely. Boy, I mean, I think of that one place I hate the most right away when I think of that. So And that's where you get good truckers leaving the industry. So next slide. And looking at, do you have underutilized capacity? So this is, what can you do literally directly? Do you have a portion of your yard that you could maybe share with other carriers you know? I'm not saying everybody needs to open up everything to everybody. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Plain and simple. Say, can we maybe have an agreement with some other company? And then they reciprocate at their terminal so our drivers could park there, they could park here. Just pick one little thing. And if you can get one truck out of a truck stop into a nice secure facility at someone's yard, guess what? That means another driver could park at that truck stop now. So that's good. Again, I mentioned there's plenty of people out there. You can Google truck parking solution app, whatever. There's plenty of people out there doing that. Maybe you would be willing to do that. Maybe you've got a spot you feel comfortable doing something more open to everybody. You could potentially do that if you've got space. So next slide, I'll give you an example of one of these things. Now, I don't know what's up with Google Satellite. What day they took this picture, what year it was, but this is Grenerth Trucking in Findlay, Ohio, carrier that I was affiliated with for many, many years. Good people there. And on the top right, on the right sort toward the bottom there, you can see the huge retention pond and where the trailers are parked there. That's where the loaded and empty trailers for Grenerth are parked. That whole rest of it there, they were like, you know what? We're not needing as much as we used to. They used to be larger. They downsized and they right sized, I'll put it that way. So they now rent the rest of that off for trailer parking and for parking for other customers that come in there. So they were able to do that. They're in a great spot for it. County Road 313 is right off I-75. Access from the north or the south, real easy. So there's just one real quick example that I know of personally there. Next slide. Oh boy, I got wrapped up. I thought it'd be done by now. So recap. Here we are. Recap. Yes, good. We're at the end. We've got lives and commodities at risk. There have been efforts to address the issue, both real-time truck parking information being shared and expanding the spaces that are out there, the capacity, which we do need both, absolutely, to reiterate that. Keep the pressure on the states. You all are well connected. They know you are economic engines for where you're at. I really hope you know you have the phone number of your representative at the township, county, city, state, federal level on speed dial, and that the staffer who specifically is assigned transportation, let me reiterate that because it's super important, because I know maybe some of you out there listening might be able to get right to your representative. That's super awesome. You deserve great for doing that. But really the staffer that works on transportation is who you want to talk with, because they're the ones that do the majority of the legwork and say, hey, I got this idea from one of the constituents. I looked it up. It's good info. Here's the statistics they gave me from ATRI and these other organizations that are credible. So keep the pressure on for them to do things and to do it right and do it well. That's your fuel tax dollars at work too. Use all the options we talked about to avoid those dangerous situations and retain good drivers and see, hey, maybe can I be part of the solution? Maybe just in one little way here, I can do something. So next slide. So you want your drivers waking up with, if you like that, I had one morning. You saw the front of my truck earlier, that's the back. That's in Petro in New York. Nice, huge parking lot because it's right by a landfill. But thankfully it didn't smell. And hey, hopefully that's what your drivers can wake up to. Rest and relax, nice, quiet, beautiful sunrise in the morning. The load's safe, they're safe. And next slide. And there's my contact info again. So if you have any questions, want to chat further about any of these things, I'll do what I've got the bandwidth for. I'm glad when Steve got a hold of me now, this is a good week to do this, but I'm always glad to help however I can. And maybe a couple months-ish down the road, we'll have that open spot open for business and have access to some more truck parking locations. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Steve and Mark, you guys, for questions, comments, all that good stuff.
Great, Scott. Thank you very much. There's a lot of really good information there. We do have a few questions. We try to wrap this up in an hour. So first question here is, and it has to do with places that allow you to make a reservation. What happens if I make a reservation and there's a truck parked in my spot?
And
Been there. Okay, good.
Been there, done that. Yes,
Uh,
absolutely. At the place where I showed you the picture earlier, actually. It's
okay.
and so PA Petro, in my personal experience and through my good friends who are still out there, they will go out there and say, hey, the driver just needs to let them know, hey, this happened. I've got a reservation, and they would send people out there, and when they're making the reservation, they've got the info on the trucks out there, and they could go along and look and say, okay, here's somebody who doesn't have a reservation, find a spot. So they usually will take care of that and rectify it. But literally about 2 weeks ago, someone who I know very well had that happen, and they just threw their hands up in the air, unfortunately, at that truck stop. And that was the TA Petro, who, again, historically, I have very good thoughts toward. So, but I think really in the majority of cases, they will work with the driver to try and rectify that.
That's good. That's good to know. Um, Another
And by the way,
question.
if it's, I'm sorry, Steve, if
Oh,
it's a
oh,
secure facility, it isn't going to happen because there's a gate keeping you from
you
getting in
wouldn't be allowed
without
to
the
get in to
credentials.
begin with. Yeah,
Another reason why looking for secure facilities is key.
absolutely. Somebody's asking a question. I think it kind of relates to you directly. Do you have fleet programs? In other words, where the carrier picks up the cost as a benefit to the driver?
There
Are there fleet-based
There are fleets
programs?
that do. There are fleets that will do that. Absolutely, positively. There are many of them out there.
Okay.
And they will do that because they see that value. And I think not coincidentally, the people I know who are with those fleets, they didn't start that fleet last week, last year, 2 years,
Right.
3 years. They've been there for years. And they're happy because that's not the only thing they're doing. They're really showing they're the fleets that are giving these look telling customers, hey, you hold up our drivers, you mess up their lives, make it stressful for them. We don't want to do business with you till you fix it because you can fix it. It can be done. Look at everybody else who's doing it right. And included in that, yes, is either reimbursing the driver or letting them use their ComData or EFS card or whatever method was acceptable. And hey, if you see someone is abusing it or unnecessarily booking reservations, address that on an individual basis. Don't penalize every driver because I've heard of a few occasions like that, and I'm sure they're out there.
That's great. One of the things that popped into my mind is, obviously trip planning is a big part here to make sure that you've thought about where you're going to be and where you're going to park. How far in advance would you have to make a reservation? Is that something you can do when you start your trip and have it be there
Maybe.
when you get there?
Maybe it all depends. Like if you, I know I literally have, I've put together truck driver focus groups for state DOTs multiple times, and actually multiple times for a couple of states even because it went that well. It was a love fest between the states caring and the drivers cared that the states cared and the state cared that the drivers cared. It's a good thing. I love doing them. And in one of them, I'll never forget when a guy said, first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is look ahead and plan out where I'm going to park for the day and potentially make a reservation. But that driver does coast to coast, real long haul. So his day is going to be just driving. My day as a driver was a mixture because I would sometimes take loads from that same place in Kentucky I mentioned earlier, all the way up into New York near Syracuse. So that's a good long day heading up there, and then load coming back down would be a good long day. But then I might have times where I would actually drop off in multiple loads in a day. So that's going to all depend. But I'd put it this way, Steve, start making an effort right away. Yes, to at least be thinking about that is what everybody should be doing. Again, I mentioned plan A and B. You don't have to spend an hour at the beginning of the day coming up with it. Just spend a few moments going, okay, I know what traffic's like there and there and there. I should be up in that area and have an idea where to park. And if it's really important and you really think you've got a good clear shot getting up there, then yeah, say, okay, maybe I even need to make a reservation because also the truck stop chains have gone to on-demand pricing like Uber and Lyft, where if you make your reservation earlier in the day, the price is a little bit lower, and you make it later in the day, it's a little bit higher sometimes. But that even fluctuates too.
It's asking Mark, do you have any questions, Mark?
No,
that
not
you've
really.
thought of?
It just certainly seems like a great opportunity for some customized content
Yeah.
for the clients that they can get out to their drivers immediately on, apps where you can find parking and make it a routine for their trip planning. And certainly Infinity offers a platform and opportunity for that customized training for your particular needs, whether it's on I-70 or I-10 or I-75 or I-95 or
Mark,
I-5.
that's what I thought. Corridor, at least to say if you've got corridors you run most often, you could just say, here's a quick little thing. Here are the 501 sites for these states or their apps.
Here they are.
Just
Yep.
again, take off a little bit. Don't think you need to cover the whole country.
Yeah. At least make sure the drivers know where the spots are, so they can make their plans
Where
to
to be
get
looking.
there. Yeah. Well, Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. We've kind of used up our hour. It went by really quickly. So super good information. Thank you very much. All of you out there that joined us today, I hope you found the information to be useful. Feel free to reach out to us or to Scott if you got further questions. I'm sure he'll try to answer you as best he could. So once again, Scott, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate you and your time. Thank you, Mark, for being here. And thanks everybody for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you on the next program. So thank you all very much and have a good rest of the afternoon.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. We'll get there, won't we?
Yes, indeed. We will. Take care.
Thank you, Scott.